Well, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you're from. We want to welcome and thank you for joining us today on a webinar about integrated pest management. This will be the first in SEPC's new educational series on a range of sustainability topics. We chose to start with IPM because of its growing importance with upcoming retailer and food service requirements, and because many of you identified it as a top priority in our Sustainability Essentials session earlier this year, presented in collaboration with Measure to Improve. Today's session brings together leaders from across the produce industry, each offering a unique perspective on IPM. First, Ariel Larson and Bailey Stein from the Sustainable Food Group at the IPM Institute will give us a high-level overview of IPM, including retailer policies and certifications. Then Jamie Masternardi from Jim Farms will share over a decade of hands-on greenhouse IPM experience, followed by Ross Williams from Titan Farms, who will offer the valuable perspective of a grower who recently implemented IPM practices in their operation. We'll conclude with a Q&A session. Please use the Q&A function at any time to submit your questions, which our panelists will address at the end of the webinar. A recording of today's session and the presentation slides will be shared with you afterwards. So thank you, and without further ado, I'm going to turn everything over to Ariel.
Great. Thank you, David. It's very exciting to be here on the first Southeast Produce Council Sustainability webinar series on integrated pest management. Can you guys see my screen now? Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm joined by my colleague Bailey Stein, and we'll talk through retailer IPM requirements, certification requirements, give a little bit of background on what is integrated pest management, what does it look like in produce, and end on sort of where this is coming from the retailer perspective. Okay. So I'll just start by introducing the IPM Institute in case you are not familiar with us. We're a nonprofit based in Madison, Wisconsin. We're 25 years old, and we were founded with the mission of advancing adoption of integrated pest management practices to reduce risks associated with pesticide use anywhere that pesticides are used. So that could be agriculture or communities. And so Bailey and I are from our Sustainable Food Group team, where we're focused in agriculture. We work with companies across the entire food supply chain, and we help to develop, manage, implement, verify, evaluate sustainability and sustainable agriculture programs and strategies. And we've helped retailers, some of them that we'll mention today, develop the IPM and pollinator health policies that they have in place now. We work with companies to really understand and assess where their pesticide risks are, and then help mitigate those through integrated pest management. And this includes a lot of supplier engagement, and so we do a lot of supplier engagement as well. So that's just a brief introduction to IPM Institute and our Sustainable Food Group. These are some of the companies that we work with. We also manage the pesticide risk tool, which is another tool to assess pesticide use and risk in agriculture. All right, I already covered our agenda. Here it is again. So without further ado, I will turn it to Bailey to talk through the retailer requirements. So what's the current retailer landscape around integrated pest management requirements of their suppliers?
Great. Yeah, so I'll go through a little history of retailer requirements and then discuss some of the differences in those requirements and talk about the certifications that are related to these requirements. So in April of 2021, Walmart became the first U.S. grocer to make specific commitments to protect pollinators in their agricultural supply chains. They committed to sourcing 100% of fresh produce and floral sold in store from suppliers that adopt IPM practices as verified by a third party by 2025. We will go into the certifications that they accept as part of this list of third parties certifications a little bit later. They also encouraged but did not require the establishment of protected pollinator habitat and as the phase out of neonicotinoids and chlorpyrifos. Shortly after, Giant Eagle became the second retailer to launch a policy that is very similar to Walmart's. They made the commitment to sourcing from farms that have IPM practices as verified by a third party by 2025. The list of certifications matches those on Walmart's original list. Walmart has since expanded their list to include additional certifications. Giant Eagle also included the caveat that produce vendors unable to achieve one of the third-party certifications can create an IPM plan that meets the criteria listed by Giant Eagle, and that is reviewed by an external entity as well. Giant Eagle's initial commitment required a phase out of neonicotinoids. They have since kind of walked that back to be in line with other retailer requirements that recommend the phase out of neonicotinoids. Later, Whole Foods in December of 2023 released their own pollinator policy with the same basic requirements that suppliers get their IPM practices verified by a third party with the same timeline as 2025. They have a few different certifications on their list as Giant Eagle and Walmart. And again, we'll go over those in a little bit later. In January of 2024, Kroger followed with a commitment as well, requiring the same from their suppliers. Their deadline is 2028 for their medium and large suppliers and 2030 for small suppliers. Those small, medium, and large definitions are taken from the USDA. And then in December of 2024, Mayor followed suit, releasing their own IPM certification requirement with a deadline of 2030. And in their requirement, small farms are exempt. Cisco, although not a grocer, has a long-standing IPM program in canned and frozen produce that launched in 2006. In 2021, they expanded their sustainable agriculture and IPM program into fresh produce crops using the sustainability standard certification. Cisco is unique in that they're using a single certification program for this requirement rather than accepting a list of different options. We'll get into a few more details in just a minute. So this is just kind of all in one place, a look at what I went over. As you can see, Walmart, Giant Eagle, and Whole Foods, their deadlines for meeting this requirement are this year, at the end of this year. Whereas Kroger and Mayer are a little bit farther down the line, and Cisco's requirements, the deadlines are kind of come in waves, starting at the end of this year and moving through the end of 2027, depending on when you were onboarded to that program. Certain of these retailers have this policy for both fresh produce and floral, Walmart and Whole Foods, and the rest, it is in just fresh produce. The exceptions or alternatives to certification, Giant Eagle offers small and medium suppliers the opportunity to write an IPM plan for review rather than pursuing one of these certifications. Whole Foods offers suppliers the ability to submit attestation of their IPM practices. Mayor has exempted all small farms, and for Cisco, potato suppliers are able to pursue the Potato Sustainability Alliance. This large table is a look at all the different certifications relevant to these different retailer policies. There are 7 certifications. The first 7 in this list: Be Better Certified, Equitable Food Initiative, Fair Trade International, Hired Labor, Fair Trade USA, Year 6 and Beyond, Rainforest Alliance, Sustainability Standard, and USDA Organic, that are accepted by all relevant grocers. Although a note here is, as I mentioned earlier, Cisco is only accepting sustainability standards for their policy. Walmart accepts the most different certifications and are actively maintaining their list and have continually benchmarked new certifications to evaluate potential inclusions since the policy launch. Giant Eagle generally follows along Walmart's list, as does Sam's Club. Sam's Club is the same list as Walmart. Whole Foods, Meijer, and Kroger have not publicly updated their lists since launching their policies. Just a note, you might see a few certifications that have check marks within parentheses. Those are to represent biodynamic and regenerative organic certified. Those 2 certifications require organic certification as a precursor, and so are therefore accepted by Walmart, Giant Eagle, and Sam's Club, although not officially on their websites. So with that, I'll pass things over again to Ariel to go over pesticide risk and IPM more broadly.
Great, thanks, Bailey. I think this will be familiar for many in this audience, but just so that we're all starting in the same place, pesticide risk is a function of both toxicity and exposure. So toxicity is essentially hazard. How toxic or how hazardous is a pesticide to an organism? And this is the information that you can find on a pesticide label or a safety data sheet. Whereas exposure is really how likely is an organism to be exposed to that particular chemical and level of toxicity. And so something can be high risk, something can be high toxicity, but if there's very low potential for exposure, it might actually be low risk, and vice versa. If something is low toxicity, but there's really great potential to be exposed, it could be a high risk chemical. And an example of that case is actually sulfur. So it is organic approved, but it's almost every year in the top 10 pesticides in terms of injury and illness reports in California, in terms of what is causing injury or illness to farm workers, just because the usage is so great. So it's generally considered low hazard or low toxicity, but really great exposure potential. And so that can lead to a high risk scenario. And the takeaway here is really just that when pesticides are registered by the EPA or other regulatory agencies outside of the US, they're considering risk and benefit. And so there's a great range of risk in terms of registered products. Just because something is registered does not mean that it's safe. And so there's opportunity to understand those risks and mitigate them through integrated pest management practices. So what is integrated pest management? It is really a decision-making process or framework for managing pests while minimizing pesticide use and risk. And that's risk to people, risk to the environment. That includes risk to beneficial insects, risk to pollinators, risk to soil organisms, aquatic organisms, farm workers. All types of risk are presented by pesticide use, and integrated pest management is about effectively managing pests while also effectively managing and mitigating the risks that they pose. IPM really relies on an understanding of pest biology at its core. So this informs pest prevention practices or pest avoidance practices. It informs how and when you monitor for pests. So monitoring is really a core component of IPM in that you're out there checking, looking for pests, and assessing their population and presence in a field and making informed decisions based on that. You're also monitoring weather. You're monitoring beneficial insects. You might be using disease models or growing degree day models for insect growth. And then a key decision point is I've assessed the pest pressure or potential pest damage, and I'm going to make a decision that's based on an economic threshold. And so what this really comes down to is the damage from the pest population that I have expected to be greater than the cost of control? And if it is, then it makes sense to control that pest, and it makes sense to take a management intervention and spend the dollars on that because you're going to avoid damage that was greater than that amount. Whereas if the pest pressure is under this economic threshold, meaning you're actually going to save the cost of that intervention because the damage expected is less than the cost of control or intervention. And so that's the sort of key concept in IPM, as well as this decision point around economic thresholds and whether or not to make a management intervention. Good record keeping is also an essential part of integrated pest management, and this just helps in terms of evaluation of the overall pest management program and how do I improve over time? Did that intervention work? Am I potentially seeing signs of resistance? Being able to evaluate things like that really takes good records of the program. Okay, so IPM, in the name, it integrates multiple strategies to manage pests, and this includes non-chemical and chemical strategies. Non-chemical strategies can include cultural strategies like crop rotation, companion planting, use of resistant varieties, biological strategies. So this could be encouraging beneficial insects by planting insectary plants or parasitoid releases. So some sort of natural predation on the pest population or biopesticides. And then physical is like shallow cultivation to manage weeds when they're small, or trapping, or netting, some sort of physical management of the pest. If it's a really small plot, it might include hand weeding. Something like that's not going to be feasible in a larger setting. And then when chemicals are used as an intervention strategy, prioritizing the lowest risk option is part of an integrated pest management program. So really understanding the risks of the pesticide options that you have. Obviously, you have to consider cost, efficacy, those types of things as well, but also really understanding what the risks are, choosing the lower risk options, and then mitigating the risks that do exist. So IPM really reduces risks associated with pesticide use in a variety of different ways. So use of monitoring and thresholds avoids use of pesticides that don't have an economic benefit. So that could be an avoided use entirely. Integration of non-chemical strategies helps to minimize pesticide use by using other strategies as well. Selecting the most effective least risk option minimizes pesticide risk when they are used. And overall, there's a focus on prevention and avoidance. So what kind of cultural practices can be integrated to prevent and avoid pest pressure, like diverse crop rotations that break pest cycles, for example. And the benefits do really go well beyond the pollinator health framing of many of the retailer policies. So they're called the pollinator health policy, but really IPM has benefits far beyond pollinator health. This is just a summary of the elements of IPM. I'm going to maybe move on, and you'll have this as reference in the recording and the slide deck, but I've talked through quite a few of these on other slides, I think. So I'm going to move on to just what is driving retailer IPM policy. So why are retailers starting with Walmart in 2021, taking action and releasing pollinator health policies that look for IPM adoption in their supply chains. The core reason is really that pollinators, the global food supply depends on pollinators, and pollinators are facing a number of interrelated threats, and their populations are suffering as a result. And it is a pretty concerning situation, in that a lot of the threats are interrelated and sort of feed off each other. So land use change, intensive agricultural management, and pesticide use, but also pollution, invasive species, pathogens. The Varroa mite has had a really big impact. Climate change, managed bee nutrition, all sorts of factors are coming together to really have a pretty big impact on both managed and native pollinator populations. And that is a big concern to retailers that are taking a very long-term view and want to be able to continue to sell food in their stores well into the future. So retailers see integrated pest management as a science-based way to address these concerns in their supply chain. And certification is really a tool that gives the retailer assurance of practice adoption in their supply chains without having to go and visit all of the farms themselves, which is cost prohibitive from a retailer perspective to visit every single farm that they source from. So certification is really that communication tool, and it's an assurance tool about I can be confident that these practices are being adopted in my supply chain. Pesticides, retailers are not making this decision in isolation. They are listening to pressure from their customers. This is reflected not just in customers, but also sort of with activist type organizations that are putting public pressure on retailers to do something about the pollinator health, the challenges that are facing pollinator health right now. And so this is just one example of a recent survey, but pesticides consistently rank among consumer concerns in terms of food supply chain and sustainability. This sort of represents responding to sort of pressure from activist groups, but also from peers. So there is an element of peer pressure, I think, in this, and that companies see that Walmart, who's, they're Walmart, they're huge. They took a first move, and companies are looking around to see what their peers are doing and wanting to not be left behind. Companies behind the scenes are also facing some shareholder and investor pressure around pesticide use in their agricultural supply chains. This is a fairly new report from Friends of the Earth that worked with a Netherlands-based firm to do research on basically the financial element of the risks of pesticides in terms of what they pose in terms of biodiversity risk. And so that type of information is just increasingly it's being tied to financial risk to companies as well. So there's some public pressure, there's shareholder pressure, there's pressure from activist organizations, there's some peer pressure element, but there's really the core is just, without pollinators, I'm not going to have food to sell. And so what action could I take as a retailer? All right, got one more slide. I'm going to turn it over to Bailey to just wrap up with thinking through meeting retailer expectations around certification.
Yeah, so beyond the table that we shared earlier, kind of noting all the different options for meeting these various retailer requirements, there are a number of things to consider when evaluating your options for pursuing certification. Each of these different certifications cover different crops and regions. They differ in the scope of the sustainability topics covered, and there might be different alignments with your own company's priorities. Audit frequency and cost are absolutely something to consider. And like I mentioned earlier, amongst that all, you want to think about um, your buyers. I think the table that we provided earlier is a really great resource to kind of look at your options there, since there are a number of different certifications that meet a lot of different requirements, and some that are very specific, and you know depending on your company, it might make sense to pursue those different options. Um, but yeah, I think after that, I'm gonna just pass it off to Jamie Mastronardi from Gem Farms to give uh, you know a description of his experience in real time. So thanks.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Jamie Mastronardi. I'm a third generation grower, and I've been working in greenhouse production for over 10 years. My grandfather started farming back in the 60s, and my dad followed in his footsteps by starting Gem Farms in 1985. Today, in 2025, we've grown into a 50-acre year-round lit production facility. One of the most important parts of growing successfully is having a strong integrated pest management program. At Gem Farms, we grow cucumbers and tomatoes, and like most greenhouses, we deal with the same common pests year after year: thrips, spider mites, whiteflies, aphids, and russet mites. What I've learned over the years is that IPM isn't just about killing bugs, it's about balance. Not every insect is a bad insect. The real goal is to manage pest populations at a level where they don't cause economic damage while letting the beneficial insects do their job. And that starts right at the beginning of the crop. The cleanup before planting is the most important step. We make sure the greenhouse is so clean that you can practically eat off the floor. That sanitation step sets the tone for the whole season. From there, prevention continues. We pay attention to weeds around the greenhouse. We use screening on vents, and we focus on starting with a clean environment before pests even have a chance to enter. Once we're planted, the first step we take is putting double-sided sticky tape in every row. This helps us capture flying pests early and gives us a picture of the pressure we're dealing with. We monitor those traps every week, and based on what we see, we adjust our biological control orders. Our main beneficials are Encarsia for whitefly, Swirsky for thrip, and Persimilis for spider mites. Different bios work better at different times, so having a mix gives us flexibility throughout the season. The goal is to always stay ahead and not to play catch up. In our 50 acres, we also rely on 4 dedicated scouts. Every week, they walk every single row and record what they see. That scouting data is critical because it helps us understand not just if pests are present, but if they are at a level that requires action. We don't react to the first pest we see. We wait until we hit certain thresholds that tell us the population could cause damage. Another layer of IPM is the greenhouse climate itself. Conditions like temperature and humidity play a huge role in pest pressure. For example, spider mites thrive in hot, dry environments. By adjusting our climate, we can make life harder for the pests and easier for the beneficials. Technology is also starting to play a role. We've started using scouting apps and digital tools to make data collection faster and more accurate. And there are even newer systems that use cameras and AI to monitor sticky traps. The industry is moving quickly in that direction. I think it's going to make IPM even stronger in the years ahead. And finally, one of the biggest goals at Gem Farms is to minimize spraying as much as possible. Avoiding chemicals is better for the plant health. It reduces the chance of resistance, and most importantly, it gives the consumer a cleaner and safer product. So to sum it all up, our IPM program is built on three things: starting clean, monitoring consistently, and using the right biological controls. Add that to the role of climate prevention, the new technology, and you have a system that only keeps pest pressure low, but also builds resilience year after year. That combination is what allows us to grow healthy crops and protecting our plants, our consumers, and the environment. Thank you, and I'm going to pass it over to Ross.
Thank you, Jamie. Unlike Jamie, I've had very little experience in implementation of IPM, and I share a lot of the experiences that Ariel was discussing during her presentation. We have actually gone through here at Titan Farms over the past year to 2 years in order to achieve certification by the end of 2025. Titan Farms, again, unlike Jamie, Titan Farms is field-based agriculture. We grow over 6,000 acres of peaches here in South Carolina. We also grow 500 acres of various produce commodities, bell pepper, eggplant, broccoli, across 2 different crops. And this year, we decided that we were going to focus specifically on our peach crop, and work towards attaining certification for the 2025 deadline, like a good, well-behaving grower shipper should wait until the last year to achieve certification. And what we came to realize was, hey, we've actually been utilizing IPM in some form or fashion for several years, through the purposes of export certification. For many years, we've been shipping into Mexico, and as a part of that program, we already had to have pest monitoring in place in the orchards. So once we changed our mindset from, oh my gosh, here's another retailer requirement, to, hey, we're already doing a lot of this. How can we change a few of our habits here on the farm, to really take a different approach and achieve certification and ultimately help us become better growers and stay on the leading edge or where we like to be. Some of the key areas of concern, or some of the key challenges for us, as we decided to implement, were number one, the labor associated to monitoring sticky traps in the orchard. It's a much broader scale monitoring program than we had ever used in our export programs before. So that presented a challenge. You had to staff a pickup truck and a couple guys to go and keep records and certainly make sure that data was being recorded properly. But then you have to house that data, review that data. Just like any of the other data that we're recording here on the farm, if it's not in a workable format, an easily reviewed format, it creates even more administrative burden. The next area of concern or challenge that we saw was really around the economic threshold. Making the decision to, okay, pest pressure is getting a little too high, but what does a little too high mean? Where does that economic threshold barrier lie? And when you're dealing with a high value specialty crop, you're in versus the cost of the application, it's a $50 an acre application, versus a very high valued specialty crop. It's a pretty high economic threshold, or a pretty low economic threshold, excuse me, to cross over where an application actually makes sense. So that was certainly a challenge for us in the initial implementation by the book. One of the areas that I would like to key in on from just an agricultural comment in general, and here at Titan Farms, during bloom, in particular, where pollinators are really the most beneficial to our crops, we have never sprayed a general use application. If there was a specific need or a targeted pest that had to be taken care of, like a mite or a thrip, you do have to make some decision like that. But at that point, it's a very targeted application. It's not a general use application. So across, the entire ag industry, I think that there's more and more of a push for specifically targeted application chemistries, more so than your general non-target application. So, but from an implementation standpoint, I do think that it has made us here at Titan Farms better growers. We were able to better understand our crop and the phenology models of the pests that we are working with, and you can make better decisions. And at the end of the day, if it comes down to the bottom dollar, you're actually looking at this year, we saw marginal expense reduction in our application budget. But I do think over the several years to come, we'll continue to see a reduction in that budget, and that margin will expand a little better as we develop better understanding of the pests that we are trying to manage. So with that, again, as I mentioned, I'm no expert, but sharing some experience that we've had here at Titan Farms with implementation of IPM here at the last bottom of the ninth in 2025.
I just want to jump in with thoughts on both Jamie and Ross because that was great. That was really excellent insight. Jamie, your point just about prevention and sanitation and starting clean, like setting yourself up for success throughout the season, and then really like heavy integration of biologicals is just really great greenhouse integrated pest management. Um, and you also made a point just that I felt insightful around integration of technology and where IPM is going in the future and like ability to monitor in a different and new way that perhaps requires less labor. So there's a good future there as well. And Ross, I super appreciate your comment around it's so common waiting till 2025, but realizing that you're already doing a lot of things that can be considered part of an IPM program, and you really just need to like button up and make sure that records are in good shape. Like that's so common in terms of what we hear from growers and where they're at and where the opportunities are is like better documentation and sort of pulling it together into like what's the program that we're using and then how do we build from there. And you made a really good point about using targeted applications. Like I didn't mention that, but that's absolutely another way to minimize use and risk is just by using a more targeted application method, and that can protect a lot of beneficials and non-target
Yeah,
organisms.
for sure. Once we got everything on paper, it was like, okay, this isn't as big of a chunk to bite out of the elephant as we thought it was. Um,
Yeah.
and to your comment on beneficials, the next step for us is we've been looking through and performing biodiversity assessments on our farm. Um, and to that, pollinator plots and some relatively simple low-hanging fruit for a grower to achieve, they exist. So if once you get it on paper, it really starts to highlight opportunities to continue to add value on your farm.
Yeah, exactly. You are going to find some low-hanging fruit once you start to look at it as a holistic. What is our IPM program? And oh, we were doing that already and we're doing that and now we're kind of pulling it together. We have better documentation because we need to show it to achieve certification. And that's very cool to hear even just to hear the expense reduction even in an early stage, pulling it together and expecting that to continue. I think both of your overviews really highlighted like it comes down to understanding pest biology, and that informs so many decisions in terms of how you're monitoring, when you're monitoring, what beneficials you're using. It's just, yeah, it's informed by pest biology. So that was a really good highlight of that. Do we have questions coming in? I should look.
I don't think I've seen any come in during the session. But I do want to remind everybody, after the session is over, if you would like to send us any emails with any questions, we'll be more than glad to forward those over to Ariel and Bailey and the group. Or if you got any questions for Jamie or Ross, we'll be more than glad to kind of get those over to them as well. But I don't know if anybody has any. We'll take one really quick. But if you don't, we can kind of start winding down. But I just want to say on behalf of the Southeast Produce Council, thank you, Jamie and Ross, for y'all's insights. And as what y'all are doing on the farm, we picked you guys intentionally because we're able to see what an indoor ag pest management program's like, and actually what you're doing in the outdoor ag world, Ross. So it was great to see those differences. It was great to see those similarities that both of you do and what are y'all working on. I also want to thank Ariel and Bailey for all their insight and all the work that y'all are doing. We depend on people like you to be the experts, and thank y'all so much for your time today. everything that y'all are doing, and just anything that we can do to help you out, we're here to do that. I do want to remind everybody that Southern Innovations is less than 2 weeks away, and we'll be carrying on our conversations on sustainability in Ed Session 1. So if you haven't signed up, please come out or sign up. We still are taking some general attendees at this point in time, and we'd love to have you out in Charlotte in a couple of weeks. And also the second webinar we'll be having at the end of October, we'll be discussing more on the packaging side of sustainability. So want you to go ahead and start thinking about that. It'll be the last week in October. We'll make sure that you go to IFPA, and then after that, we'll give you about 7 or 8 days, and then we'll bring the webinar out. But I do want to thank everybody for joining today. We don't want to take too much of your time, but thank you for that. And just remember, if you have any questions, just to send them on over to us at the council. And with that, I'll conclude our session, and thank you and have a good week.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.